the bombing. The undercover had spent several months with his victim, convincing him of his Islamic duty to engage in jihad against civilians. The informant was to supply the explosives, the funding, and even came up with the idea with the plan. He didn't start taping Siraj until after he had thoroughly radicalized him. In the wake of the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, and the torture of Bagram and Abu Ghraib. At the last minute, Siraj, with a backpack full of fake explosives, decided not to go through with the attack and turned toward the informant saying that he didn't want to kill anybody, that he had to ask his mother first. It was too late. 5 days later, he was arrested and would be convicted to 30 years of imprisonment as a result. On February 21st, 2009, Ahmed a 34-year-old Afghan immigrant, was arrested in Orange County, California, and charged with perjury and passport fraud for lying to an undercover informant. The media blew the case out of proportion, emphasizing and repeating that the accused had been recorded referring to Osama bin Laden as an angel, and claiming to have a brother-in-law that was a high-ranking member of the Taliban. The claim was discovered to be a fraud and exaggeration told the undercover informant Craig Montley. The informant, only 18 months earlier, had been kicked out of a mosque in Irvine, California, after trying to draw individuals into a plot to blow up shopping malls and abandoned buildings. When the mosque petitioned the authorities to undertake an investigation, they refused. The informant, we now know, had earned tens of thousands of dollars in payments from the FBI in return for spying on Muslims. And thanks to local journalism from Orange County, we also know that at the same time he was entrapping Muslims, he was running illegal scams on females from his local gym, posing as a distributor of steroids or illegal growth hormones, and eventually going back to jail for conning 2 women out of more than $150,000. He was an informant with a lengthy criminal record, an informant that had agreed to work with the authorities while he was incarcerated, and the primary source of several complaints by Muslims themselves to local authorities for loudly espousing his desire to engage in terrorism and trying to lead others to follow and cooperate. The use of informants is typical in nearly all cases against Muslims since 9/11. But the role they play in exaggerating and manipulating the actual data cannot be underestimated. Typically, they are all criminal convicts, and the people they are infiltrating have no criminal record whatsoever, and no previous expressed intent to engage in any violent act whatsoever. Take the other recent case of the Newburgh Ford from upstate New York, a case that is coming to trial as we speak, where 4 Muslim men stand accused of plotting to blow up a synagogue in Riverdale, New York. The informant in this case had already been responsible for entrapping 2 other members of the upstate New York Muslim community, and would sit outside the local masjid in his Mercedes, espousing radical views while also offering free meals, jobs, advice, and other assistance. While most of the community already fingered him as a provocateur, the 4 men, naive and poor, were enticed not by the inference rhetoric so much as they were by his bankroll, his money, and they proceeded to gain thousands of dollars, cell phones, and computers during their interactions with him, until the informant offered to accessorize the blowing up of a synagogue and funded the entire thing. The informant, it turns out, was a Pakistani immigrant who was to be convicted and probably deported in the wake of 9/11 for driver's license fraud. That is, until he agreed to work with the FBI as an undercover. Similarly, in 2006, the notorious Fort Dix case witnessed 5 men deemed suspect after they were caught on tape by a store clerk riding horseback, having a pillow fight, shooting legal guns at a legal firing range, and stating with their tongues, Allahu Akbar, infiltrated by 2 agent provocateurs, both Muslim men, previously convicted themselves of serious crimes as well. These agents suggested an attack on Fort Dix. They came up with the idea. They gave significant amounts of money and continuously encouraged the defendants to watch jihadi videos and remark on their political views, The informants in this case were so aggressive in coercing their victims that after repeated requests for maps at Fort Dix, one of the defendants caved in and submitted a map. But he recorded the conversation and submitted it to the FBI. However, the FBI refused to accept that conversation on the grounds that it was irrelevant. The investigation continued, and eventually they were charged with accessorizing in a plot concocted and planned not by them, but by the informant altogether. The list goes on. In September of last year, Michael C. Fenton was charged with attempting to blow up the Paul Findlay Federal Building in Springfield, Illinois. His case was crafted by an informant who claimed to be a bomb supplier for Al-Qaeda. Fenton was incited and led to believe that a truck full of explosives would be detonated by a cell phone given to him by the informant. In this case, the informant came up with the idea, supplied the bomb to the truck, and all he had to do was convince his target to agree to simply call a cell phone number and initiate the explosion. A similar case, publicized on the same day, revealed that yet another man, Hosam Meher Hussein Smedley, age 19 from Dallas, Texas, who drew the FBI's attention because of his participation on Islamist sites over the internet, was coerced by another informant to park a van that he believed was full of explosives under an office building in downtown Dallas. Of course, the agent provided the explosives, concocted the plan, and only had to convince his victim to participate. Colleen Rose, known as Jihad Jane, was charged with trying to murder cartoonist Lars Vilks in Sweden after an unidentified co-conspirator incited her to travel and seek out the act. Recently, the arrest of 2 young men in New Jersey involved an informant that offered to allow his victims to use property he owned in Egypt to hold over at until they could proceed on to Somalia, where they were to engage in jihad. There are many cases with similar circumstances. As the brother said, if you pay attention only to what the media says, you would suggest that they have actual evidence for these charges. Closer scrutiny reveals that we must always be people that verify information. We must always verify and look for the factual evidences in cases against the Muslims. We are certainly targets. This is obvious. That's not the only way it works. Imam Fuad Farahi, the imam of the mosque attended by Jose Padilla, the so-called dirty bomber, reports that after being questioned about his relationship with Padilla and another, he was asked by the FBI to work for them as an informant. His student visa had expired, and the U.S. knew that he had to ask the government for a renewal and was thus vulnerable. Over a 5-year period of time, after refusing to work for them, the FBI proceeded to threaten him with deportation and even to charge him with terrorism in order to coerce him to work for them. The Council of Arab Islamic Relations, or CARE, suspects that there are hundreds of cases, in fact, where Muslims have been threatened with deportation or criminal charges if they refuse to cooperate as informants. But the question that must be asked is whether or not the practices included in Tarek's case and others like them are preventing real terror threats at all, or creating cases that would otherwise be non-existent, and thereby instigating McCarthy-like era practices of justification for broader wars and oppressions. The public announcement of arrest and charge is usually followed, as we heard earlier, by a media blitz that floods the general population with the idea that supporters of Al-Qaeda were planning these attacks on their own, and that they were somehow intercepted by noble FBI agents who saved the day in the nick of time, preventing the carrying out of the act. When, if ever, news is revealed that suggests the agents may have themselves incited the acts, it is never as widespread as the looped press coverage during the immediate aftermath. In this manner, by creating crimes that otherwise would not have occurred, or commenting on crimes that are mostly the imaginary fabrication of informants, a culture of fear is concocted, and the means of law enforcement is no longer neutral, but intended to obtain preconceived political ends. In Tarek's case, the charge that they were planning to attack shopping malls is built solely on the testimony of a cooperating witness. Actually, I guess he's not even physically charged with that. But if you would have seen the